The rain came down like a punishment from heaven. It hammered the fields of Montana, turned dirt roads into rivers of black mud, and wrapped Iron Creek Ranch in a curtain of cold darkness. Most people would have stayed inside and waited for the storm to pass, but two elderly figures kept walking. Harold Whitmore, 83 years old, leaned heavily on a worn wooden cane. Beside him, his wife Mabel struggled through the rain with trembling legs and soaked clothes. They had nowhere left to go. No money, no phone, no family willing to protect them, only fear. At the end of the road stood a lonely ranch owned by former Navy SEAL Ethan Holloway. Ethan lived alone with Ranger, a retired military German shepherd who had once saved his life overseas. The old couple stopped at the gate. Harold swallowed hard. "We don't need much," he called through the storm. "Could we sleep in your barn tonight?" The request should have been simple, but before Ethan could answer, Ranger stood up. The dog stared at Mabel. Then he walked straight through the rain and sat beside her feet. He refused to leave. That was the moment Ethan knew something was wrong, because Ranger had spent years learning how to recognize fear, and the fear inside this woman was unlike anything he had seen in a long time. Then headlights appeared in the darkness behind them. A truck was coming, and whoever was driving it was not coming to help. The storm had been building since afternoon. By evening, the sky above Iron Creek Ranch had become a solid wall of dark clouds stretching across the Montana horizon. Wind pushed against the old farmhouse, while rain struck the roof in steady waves. Ethan Holloway stood beneath the porch overhang, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. At 36, he looked exactly like what he had once been, a warrior. Broad shoulders, strong hands, short dark hair trimmed close to his scalp, gray eyes that missed very little. Yet the war he carried now existed entirely inside him. 3 years earlier, Ethan had lost his father to cancer. A year later, his mother followed. The ranch became his responsibility, his burden, his refuge. Sometimes, all at once. Before that, he had spent more than a decade serving as a Navy SEAL. His final deployment ended with the death of his closest teammate, a man named Luke Mercer. Ethan still remembered the explosion, still remembered reaching through smoke and dust, still remembered being too late. Some nights he woke hearing sounds that no longer existed. Some mornings he stood in the kitchen, unable to remember why he had walked there. Only Ranger remained constant. The large German shepherd lay beside the porch steps. The dog had saved Ethan during a mission overseas by detecting an ambush moments before it happened. Since then, they had never truly been apart. The ranch was quiet, until Ranger suddenly stood. The dog's ears rose, his amber eyes focused on the distant road. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it, buddy?" Ranger didn't bark. He simply stared. Ethan followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing except rain. Then movement appeared beyond the gate. Two figures, slow, unsteady, fighting their way through the storm. As they came closer, Ethan felt something tighten inside his chest. The man looked exhausted. The woman looked terrified. Not lost, not confused, terrified. When they finally reached the gate, Harold Whitmore removed his soaked hat. Rain streamed down his lined face. His voice nearly disappeared beneath the wind. "Sorry to bother you." Mabel stood beside him, shivering violently. Her coat hung loosely from her thin frame. One sleeve had slipped slightly upward. Ethan noticed dark bruises around her wrist. Fresh bruises. The kind that didn't come from accidents. Before he could ask questions, Harold lowered his eyes. "We saw your light." His voice cracked. "We were hoping we might sleep in your barn until morning." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Ranger walked forward. The big German shepherd approached Mabel slowly, carefully, almost gently. Mabel froze. Ranger sniffed her hand once, then sat beside her boots, and refused to move. A tear escaped Mabel's eye. She quickly looked away. Something about that small gesture struck Ethan harder than he expected. He had seen fear before. He had seen people running from danger. He knew exactly what it looked like. Finally, he nodded toward the farmhouse. "You're not sleeping in the barn." Harold's shoulders fell. "I understand." Ethan shook his head. "No. He opened the front door. "You're coming inside." For the first time all evening, Mabel looked up. Hope and disbelief mixed in her eyes. Then, far down the road, headlights appeared through the rain. Ranger turned immediately. The dog's posture changed. Every muscle tightened. The truck was coming fast. And suddenly Ethan knew the storm outside was no longer the biggest danger approaching his ranch. The truck came to a stop outside the ranch gate. Its headlights cut through the rain like twin blades, flooding the yard with harsh white light. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, Ethan heard Mabel gasp. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small sound of pure dread. It was enough. Ethan had spent years learning to read fear. Fear rarely announced itself with screams. More often, it appeared in tiny reactions, a stiff shoulder, a shaking hand, a sudden silence. Mabel's reaction told him everything. The truck door slammed. A large man stepped out. He was in his mid-40s, broad and heavyset, with a thick neck and a face hardened by anger. Rain soaked his dark jacket as he marched toward the gate. Harold lowered his head. Mabel took an involuntary step backward. The stranger didn't even look at Ethan. His eyes went directly to the old couple. "There you are," his voice carried across the yard. "Cold, sharp, possessive. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused me?" Ethan felt Ranger move beside him. The dog's body had gone rigid. The man reached the gate and gripped the metal bars. "Get your coats. We're leaving." Neither Harold nor Mabel moved. The silence seemed to surprise him. Finally, he looked at Ethan. "You the owner?" "This is my ranch." The man nodded. "Good." His tone suggested the conversation was already over. "My grandparents wandered off. I'll take them home now." Grandparents. The word sounded wrong, coming from him. Not affectionate, not concerned, like he was talking about property. Harold suddenly spoke. "We didn't wander." The man turned. "What?" The old man's hands trembled around his cane. But for the first time since arriving, he met the man's eyes. "We left." A dangerous silence followed. Rain hammered the roof. Wind pushed through the trees. Then the man's expression darkened. "Harold." His voice became low and threatening. "Don't start this again." Mabel flinched. Ranger noticed. So did Ethan. The man pointed toward the truck. "Get in." Nobody moved. The man's face reddened. "I've spent years taking care of you." Still silence. "I manage your bills." Nothing. "I handle your bank accounts." Nothing. His anger grew with every unanswered word. Finally, Mabel whispered something so quietly, Ethan almost missed it. "You took everything." The man's eyes snapped toward her. Instantly, she looked down. The reaction disturbed Ethan more than any threat could have. People only reacted that way when fear had become a habit. "That's enough," the man snapped. Then he looked at Ethan. "My name is Travis Whitmore." The name meant nothing to Ethan. The fear behind it meant everything. Travis continued. "These two aren't thinking clearly. They're old. They get confused." Harold laughed softly. It was one of the saddest sounds Ethan had ever heard. Confused people didn't walk 10 miles through a storm. Confused people didn't hide bruises. Confused people didn't look relieved after reaching safety. Ethan folded his arms. "They said they're staying here tonight." Travis stared. The rain dripped from his beard. "You don't understand what you're getting involved in." "Maybe." Ethan's voice remained calm. "Maybe I do." For a moment, something ugly flashed across Travis's face. Not frustration, not concern, fear. Then it disappeared behind anger. "This isn't over." His eyes moved to Harold, then Mabel, then Ranger. Finally, he stepped backward toward the truck. "You'll regret this." The engine roared to life moments later. The truck disappeared into the darkness, but the feeling it left behind remained. Inside the farmhouse, Mabel finally collapsed into a kitchen chair. Tears streamed down her face. Harold stood beside her, helplessly, like a man watching his own heart break. Ethan quietly placed a mug of tea in front of her. Neither spoke for several minutes. Then Mabel whispered the words that changed everything. "He won't stop." Harold closed his eyes, and Ethan realized the storm had followed them here. Its name was Travis Whitmore. The kitchen remained silent long after Travis's truck disappeared into the darkness. Rain tapped softly against the windows now. no longer violent but steady, as if the storm itself were listening. Mabel sat at the table, staring into her untouched tea. Her hands trembled around the mug. Across from her, Harold looked 20 years older than he had when Ethan first saw him at the gate. The old man stared into the fire burning inside the wood stove, not speaking, not moving, just remembering. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter. Ranger lay beside Mabel's chair, his head resting on her foot. The dog hadn't left her side once. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "How long has this been happening?" Harold closed his eyes. For several seconds, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded exhausted. "Longer than we admitted." Mabel lowered her head. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Ethan waited. Years in the military had taught him that people shared painful truths only when they were ready. Eventually, Harold took a deep breath. "Our daughter, Emily, died 12 years ago." The words seemed to drain the strength from him. "Cancer." Mabel began crying quietly. She was only 41. Harold continued. "Travis was 23 then." A sad smile crossed his face. "We loved that boy." The old man pointed toward a photograph hanging from the inside of his wallet. Ethan looked. The picture showed a younger Harold carrying a smiling boy on his shoulders. A fishing pole rested between them. Both were laughing. That was Travis. Harold's voice cracked. "He used to call me his hero." The room grew quiet again. "We helped raise him after Emily passed away." Mabel finally spoke. "We paid for trade school. We helped him buy his first truck. We paid his rent when he struggled." Harold nodded. "Every time he fell, we caught him." For a moment, pride replaced the pain in his eyes. Then, it vanished. Then came the divorce. The old man stared into the fire. He changed after that. Debt followed. Drinking followed. Anger followed. At first, Travis simply asked for money, then demanded it, then took it. He said he needed temporary help. Harold's fingers tightened around his cane. "We believed him." Mabel wiped away tears. "I kept telling myself he was hurting." Her voice broke. "I thought if we loved him enough, he'd come back." Ethan saw something heartbreaking in her expression. Not fear, hope. The last remains of hope. The kind that survives even after being betrayed 100 times. Harold continued. "Eventually, he moved into our house." The old man's jaw tightened. "He said he wanted to help us." Ethan already knew what came next. First came the mail, then the bank accounts, then the passwords, then the phone, then the freedom. Little by little, piece by piece, until nothing belonged to them anymore. Mabel pulled her sleeve upward. Dark bruises covered her wrist. Ethan felt anger stir inside him. "He did that?" She nodded. "I tried hiding some cash." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. When he found it, she couldn't finish. Harold finished for her. He squeezed her wrist until she fell. Silence filled the room. The fire popped softly. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees. Inside, Ethan felt something cold settle deep inside him. He had seen predators before. Some wore uniforms. Some carried weapons. Others sat at family dinner tables. "They locked us upstairs," Mabel suddenly whispered. Ethan looked up. "What?" Her tears returned. "Sometimes all night." Harold's eyes filled with shame. "He said it was for our safety." The words sounded ridiculous now. Cruel. Monstrous. But neither old person laughed, because they had lived it. For years. Finally, Harold looked directly at Ethan. The old man's eyes were full of pain. Not because he had been abused, because he had loved the man who abused him. "I failed him." Ethan shook his head immediately. "No." Harold stared. Ethan's voice remained calm. "You loved him." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "That's not failure." For the first time that night, Mabel reached across the table and took Harold's hand. The gesture was small, fragile, beautiful. And in that moment, Ethan made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, he would not let them face it alone. Sleep never truly came to Iron Creek Ranch that night. The storm finally weakened after midnight, but the tension inside the farmhouse remained. Harold and Mabel slept near the fireplace, beneath thick blankets Ethan had found in a storage closet. Even then, neither seemed able to rest peacefully. Several times Ethan noticed Mabel wake suddenly, breathing hard as though she had escaped a nightmare. Each time, Ranger quietly moved closer. Each time she calmed down. By 3 in the morning, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table. A single lamp illuminated the room. His phone rested beside a cold cup of coffee. After a long moment, he picked it up. There was one person he trusted for situations like this: Nathan Cross. Former military investigator, former troublemaker, current expert at finding truths people desperately wanted hidden. Nathan answered on the second ring. "Holloway, you only call at this hour when somebody's dead or somebody's lying." Ethan almost smiled. This one's still alive. Nathan listened silently as Ethan explained everything. The bruises, the fear, the threats, the control. When Ethan finished, Nathan spoke immediately. "You need documentation," I figured. "No. You need proof before he realizes people are paying attention." Nathan paused, then added, "I'm sending you a name." A text message arrived seconds later. Victoria Hale, elder rights attorney, former Navy legal officer, one of the best in the state. "Call her in the morning." Ethan nodded. "I will." After hanging up, he looked toward the fireplace. Harold shifted slightly beneath his blanket. Something fell from the pocket of his coat, hanging nearby. A small, metallic sound. Ranger lifted his head instantly. The dog stood and walked toward the coat. He nudged it with his nose. Then nudged it again. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" Ranger touched the pocket once more. Curious, Ethan reached inside. His fingers closed around something hard. A small, rusted tin box. The metal was worn from age. The corners dented. The latch barely held together. Ethan carried it to the table. Moments later, Harold woke and saw it. The old man's eyes widened. "Oh, God." He slowly stood. "I forgot." Mabel sat upright immediately. "What?" "The box." Harold's voice shook. "I thought I lost it." For the first time all night, genuine hope appeared in his face. Ethan opened the lid. Inside lay several folded documents wrapped carefully in an old handkerchief. Property records, bank statements, tax notices, photocopies, letters, paper after paper. Evidence. The deeper Ethan looked, the worse things became. Several withdrawal slips carried signatures that appeared inconsistent. Property forms contained strange amendments. One document listed preliminary land evaluations. Another mentioned potential development opportunities. Mabel suddenly pointed at one of the papers. "That wasn't there before." Harold nodded. "Neither was that." Ethan carefully spread everything across the table. Then he discovered a folded note hidden beneath the documents. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting shaky. Harold recognized it immediately. Mabel wrote that. Ethan unfolded it. The room fell silent. Only the ticking kitchen clock remained. Then he read the words aloud. "If anything happens to us." His voice slowed. "Investigate Travis." No one spoke. Mabel covered her mouth. Harold lowered his head. Years of fear suddenly felt real. Documented, recorded, proven. Ethan looked through the papers again. One file caught his attention. An appraisal estimate. Large numbers, very large numbers. Attached to it was a development inquiry. A company name appeared at the top, Summit Crest Holdings. The proposed purchase involved hundreds of acres. Harold's land. Mabel's home. Their future. Everything. Ethan suddenly understood. This wasn't about helping elderly grandparents. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was about ownership, control, greed. Travis wasn't waiting for Harold and Mabel to die. He was trying to erase them while they were still alive. A cold anger settled inside Ethan, the same controlled anger that had carried him through dangerous missions overseas. He carefully gathered the documents. Tomorrow, they would contact Victoria Hale. Tomorrow, they would start building a case. Tomorrow, Travis Whitmore would discover something he had never expected. His victims were no longer standing alone, and for the first time in years, someone was finally fighting back. The next morning arrived under a gray Montana sky. The rain had stopped, but low clouds still hung over the valley like a blanket that refused to lift. By 8 o'clock, Ethan was already on the phone with Victoria Hale. She arrived at Iron Creek Ranch before noon. The attorney stepped out of a dark blue sedan carrying a leather briefcase and an expression that suggested she had very little patience for people who preyed on the vulnerable. Victoria was in her early 40s, tall, sharp-eyed, composed. The kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to take control of a room. She spent nearly an hour reviewing the contents of the rusted tin box. The longer she read, the colder her expression became. Finally, she placed one document aside, then another, then a third. These signatures don't match. Harold looked confused. What does that mean? Victoria pointed toward two documents. The pressure is different. The writing angle changes. The letters aren't formed the same way. She looked directly at Ethan. I believe several of these signatures were forged. Mabel gasped softly. Harold simply stared at the papers, as though they had become strangers. Victoria continued reviewing. 10 minutes later, she found something even worse. A power of attorney document. One supposedly granting Travis authority over nearly every financial decision they owned. Victoria frowned. When was this signed? Harold shook his head. I don't remember. Mabel looked terrified. Victoria checked another file, then another. Suddenly, she froze. This document claims Mabel witnessed the signing at home. Mabel blinked. I was in the hospital that week. The room became silent. Victoria slowly placed the paper on the table. Then this document is fraudulent. Ethan felt anger tightening inside him. Not explosive anger, the dangerous kind. The calm kind. The kind that waited. By early afternoon, Victoria had contacted local authorities. Sheriff Thomas Granger agreed to meet them at the Whitmore property. An hour later, a convoy of vehicles rolled onto the old family farm. Harold's face changed the moment he saw the house. The place looked smaller than he remembered. Older. Tired. Paint peeled from the walls. The porch sagged. Several windows appeared damaged. Mabel lowered her eyes. This used to be beautiful. Her voice broke. Ethan believed her. Even neglected, the place still carried traces of the home it once had been. Inside, the atmosphere felt wrong immediately. The house smelled stale. Heavy. Unlived. Victoria began photographing everything. Sheriff Granger and Deputy Owen Mercer searched room by room. Bills covered the kitchen counter. Several notices remained unopened. A locked metal cash box sat beside them. Then Deputy Mercer called from the pantry. You need to see this. Everyone gathered around. Inside a plastic storage container sat dozens of medication bottles. A padlock secured the lid. Mabel froze. Those are mine. Sheriff Granger frowned. Why are they locked up? Mabel's voice trembled. Travis said I wasn't responsible enough. Victoria immediately photographed the container. That's evidence. Harold looked physically sick, but the worst discovery waited upstairs. Granger found it first. The German shepherd stopped at the end of a narrow hallway. His ears stood forward. His body stiffened. Ethan followed his gaze. A bedroom door. A heavy metal slide lock had been installed on the outside, not inside. Outside. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Sheriff Granger quietly cursed. Victoria's face hardened. Harold turned pale. Slowly, the sheriff unlocked the door. The room beyond was small, cold, almost empty. 2 narrow beds, 1 chair, 1 window, and that window had been nailed shut. Mabel began crying. Harold reached for the wall to steady himself. He said it was for our safety. No one answered, because there was nothing to say. The truth stood in front of them, visible, undeniable. Then Ranger walked to one of the beds. The dog sniffed beneath the mattress. Once. Twice. Then he pawed at the floor. Ethan knelt, reached underneath, and pulled out a small digital recorder. Harold stared. I thought he found that. Victoria immediately pressed play. The recording crackled. Then a familiar voice filled the room. Travis, angry, drunk, threatening, demanding signatures, demanding obedience, demanding ownership. When the recording ended, nobody moved. The silence felt enormous. Then Victoria spoke. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. This case just changed, and deep inside, Ethan knew Travis Whitmore was running out of places to hide. The drive back to Iron Creek Ranch was quiet, too quiet. Harold sat in the back seat, staring out the window, while Montana's rolling fields passed by beneath a darkening sky. Beside him, Mabel held a tissue in both hands. Neither spoke. The discoveries at the Whitmore house had taken something out of them, not hope, something heavier, denial. For years, they had tried to convince themselves that Travis was simply angry, simply struggling, simply lost. Now, the evidence told a different story. The truth was far uglier. And truth, Ethan knew, could be painful when it finally arrived. As the ranch appeared in the distance, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. The dog had been sleeping most of the ride. Now every muscle in his body tightened. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" Ranger stared to the windshield. His ears stood forward, his gaze fixed on something near the barn. A cold feeling settled in Ethan's stomach. The ranch gate stood open. He knew he had closed it. Slowly, deliberately, every time. The truck rolled into the yard. Ethan stopped. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then, he stepped out. Ranger jumped down beside him. The German Shepherd's posture changed instantly. Alert, focused, ready. Victoria exited her vehicle behind them. Sheriff Granger and Deputy Mercer arrived moments later. Everyone followed Ethan toward the barn. The closer they came, the stronger the smell became. Fresh paint. Harold suddenly grabbed Mabel's hand. The barn door came into view, and everyone stopped. Painted across the weathered wood in large red letters was a message. The words seemed to drip beneath the fading daylight. "Give them back, or everything burns." For a moment, nobody spoke. Mabel's knees nearly gave out. Ethan caught her before she fell. Her face had gone completely white. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Harold stared at the message, his eyes filled with pain. Not fear. Pain. The kind that came when someone you loved became someone you no longer recognized. Victoria immediately began taking photographs. Sheriff Granger's expression darkened. "This is criminal intimidation." Deputy Mercer examined the area around the barn. A few minutes later, he called out, "Sheriff!" Everyone moved toward the rear pasture. The deputy pointed toward the fence. The wire had been cut cleanly. Recently, the sharp metal edges still gleamed. Someone had entered the property, deliberately. The realization hung heavily over everyone. Travis knew they were fighting back, and Travis was becoming desperate. That night, the atmosphere inside the farmhouse felt different. The danger was no longer hidden. It had announced itself. Mabel sat quietly near the fireplace. Several times, Ethan noticed her staring at the windows. Every passing shadow made her flinch. Every distant sound made her tense. Ranger remained beside her, always watching, always listening. Harold stood on the porch after sunset, looking across the dark fields. Ethan joined him. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Finally, Harold broke the silence. "I should have seen it sooner." Ethan looked at him. "Seen what?" Harold's voice cracked. "The greed, the lies, the anger." He swallowed hard. "I kept making excuses because I loved him." The old man lowered his head. "I raised that boy." The guilt in his voice was heartbreaking. Ethan stared into the darkness beyond the pasture. Then he spoke quietly. "Love isn't a mistake." Harold looked at him. Ethan continued. "People choose what they become." The old man's eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, neither spoke. Inside the house, Victoria was already building the legal case. Phone calls, documents, evidence, witness statements. She worked with relentless determination. Outside, Sheriff Granger arranged increased patrols near the ranch. Everyone was preparing. Everyone except Travis, because Travis still believed fear would win. Later that night, Ethan installed trail cameras around the property, one near the barn, one by the pasture, one overlooking the equipment shed. The same methods he had used years ago in hostile territory. Old habits. Useful habits. When everything was finished, he stood beside Ranger in the darkness. The wind carried the scent of rain and something else. Trouble. Ranger stared toward the tree line. A low growl rolled deep within his chest. Ethan followed his gaze. The darkness revealed nothing, but his instincts whispered the same warning. The threat on the barn wasn't the end. It was a promise. And somewhere beyond the fields, Travis Whitmore was already planning his next move. The attack came 2 nights later. Ethan wasn't surprised. Men like Travis Whitmore rarely retreated when cornered. They escalated. By 10 o'clock, Iron Creek Ranch had fallen silent beneath a moonless Montana sky. Clouds drifted across the stars, leaving the land wrapped in darkness. Inside the farmhouse, Harold and Mabel sat near the fireplace. Victoria had returned to town hours earlier after organizing additional legal filings. Sheriff Granger promised increased patrols. Still, Ethan trusted preparation more than promises. The trail cameras remained active. The equipment shed lights were off. The barn stood dark. Everything appeared normal, exactly as Ethan intended. Ranger lay near the front door. At first glance, he seemed asleep, but Ethan knew better. Military dogs never truly slept when danger was near. At 11:47 p.m., Ranger's head snapped upward, instantly, silently. The dog rose to his feet, every muscle tightened. Ethan saw it from across the room. The old instincts returned immediately. "What do you hear?" Ranger moved toward the mudroom window. A low growl emerged from deep inside his chest. Not loud, not aggressive, a warning. Ethan killed the living room lamp. Darkness filled the farmhouse. Harold looked up. Mabel gripped her blanket. "What is it?" Ethan moved to the window. Then he saw them. 3 figures crossing the rear pasture, moving carefully through the darkness, heading toward the barn. His jaw tightened. Travis. And he wasn't alone. The 2 men beside him carried something. Fuel cans. Ethan's pulse slowed. Not from fear. From focus. The same focus that had carried him through combat zones years earlier. He turned toward Harold and Mabel. Back bedroom. Neither argued. The fear in their eyes told him they already understood. Harold helped Mabel stand. Together they disappeared down the hallway. Ranger remained beside Ethan, waiting, watching. The 3 intruders reached the barn. Moonlight briefly revealed their faces. Travis, a heavy, bald man with a gray beard. A younger man with nervous eyes. Derek Calloway. Brent Hollow. Though Ethan didn't know their names yet, only their purpose. The men set the fuel cans down. Travis pointed toward the rear wall of the barn. His voice carried faintly through the night. "Port there." The younger man hesitated. "You said nobody would be here." Travis rounded on him instantly. "Then stop asking questions." The man fell silent. Derek unscrewed the first fuel can. The smell of gasoline drifted across the pasture. Ethan's expression hardened. The barn wasn't just a building. The horses were inside. The hay. The equipment. Everything. Travis wasn't making a threat. He was attempting to destroy lives. The younger man removed a lighter from his pocket. That was enough. Ethan stepped from the shadows. "Bad idea." All 3 men froze. The lighter nearly slipped from Brent's hand. Travis spun around. For a brief moment, genuine surprise appeared on his face. Then hatred replaced it. "You." Ethan stopped several yards away. Ranger appeared beside him. Silent. Motionless. A black and tan shadow with amber eyes. "You should have stayed out of this." Travis's voice dripped with anger. Ethan shrugged. "You brought it to my ranch." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Travis laughed. The sound carried no humor. "Do you have any idea what they've cost me?" Ethan said nothing. The rant came anyway. "They ruined everything. My debts, my life, my future." His voice rose with every word. Meanwhile, Derek continued holding the gasoline can. Meanwhile, Brent clutched the lighter. Meanwhile, Ranger watched, waiting, calculating. The younger man finally looked uncertain. "This feels wrong." Travis rounded on him. "Then leave." The insult landed hard. Something shifted. The younger man took a step backward, then another. Fear had entered the group, and Ethan knew the moment was coming. The moment when desperation would become violence. Travis pointed toward the barn. "Light it." Nobody moved. His face twisted with rage. "Do it!" Brent's shaking hand moved toward the lighter, and in that exact moment, Ranger exploded into motion. The German Shepherd launched forward like a missile, fast, precise, controlled. His bark shattered the night. Brent stumbled backward in shock. The lighter flew from his hand, landing harmlessly in the dirt. At the same time, Ethan charged. The confrontation had begun, and before dawn arrived, Iron Creek Ranch would become a battlefield. Everything happened at once. The lighter hit the dirt. Ranger's thunderous bark echoed across the pasture. Brent stumbled backward, panic flooding his face. Derek dropped the gasoline can and raised both hands instinctively. But Travis didn't retreat. He exploded. "You idiots!" His furious scream ripped through the darkness. Ethan reached Derek first. The larger man swung wildly. Years earlier, the attack might have triggered combat instincts. Now, Ethan simply reacted. He stepped aside, caught the man's wrist, redirected the momentum. Derek crashed hard into the muddy ground. The gasoline can rolled harmlessly away. Meanwhile, Brent backed away from the confrontation. Fear had completely overtaken him. "I didn't sign up for this." His voice cracked. "I thought we were just scaring them." Travis ignored him. His attention locked onto the farmhouse, toward Harold, toward Mabel, toward the people he blamed for every failure in his life. Something dangerous flashed inside his eyes, something reckless. Then he ran, straight toward the house. Ethan saw it immediately. "Travis!" Too late. The man was already sprinting across the yard. Ranger moved to intercept, but Travis changed direction suddenly, forcing the dog to adjust. For one brief second, he gained ground. Then the farmhouse door opened. Harold Whitmore stepped outside. Mabel's terrified voice followed him. "Harold, no!" But the old man kept walking, slowly, deliberately. His cane struck the porch boards with each step. 83 years old, arthritic, tired, broken in many ways, yet somehow standing taller than he had in years. The sight stunned Travis. He actually stopped. Rainwater dripped from the porch roof. The night became strangely quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. Harold looked directly at his grandson. For a moment, Ethan saw something remarkable. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. Only truth remained. Travis pointed angrily. "You did this." His voice cracked with rage. "You ruined everything." Harold stared at him, then spoke. "No." The single word landed harder than a shout. Travis blinked. "No?" The old man slowly descended one porch step, then another. "You ruined yourself." The younger man's face twisted. "You think you're better than me?" Harold's eyes filled with tears. Not tears of fear, tears of grief. "I loved you." Silence. The words seemed to strike everyone. Even Ethan felt it. Even Ranger stopped growling. Harold continued. "When your mother died, I promised I'd take care of you." His voice trembled. "When you were hungry, we fed you. When you were lost, we helped you. When you failed, we lifted you back up." Mabel stood in the doorway, crying openly now. The years of pain poured down her face. Harold looked at her briefly, then back at Travis. "You were our son." For the first time, uncertainty appeared in Travis's eyes. Only for a moment. Then anger returned, like armor. "You gave me nothing." The old man's shoulders sagged. The words clearly wounded him. Still, he didn't look away. "Love gave you everything." Harold's voice grew stronger. "Greed took it away." The sentence hung in the night air. Simple. Devastating. Travis snapped. With a roar of frustration, he charged forward, straight at Harold. Mabel screamed. Ethan moved. But Ranger was faster. The German Shepherd launched across the yard like a shadow come alive. He landed directly between Travis and Harold, hackles raised, teeth visible. A deep, warning growl rolled through the darkness. Not an attack. A barrier. A living wall. Travis skidded to a stop. His confidence vanished instantly. Ranger took one step forward, then another. The message was unmistakable. Not one more step. Travis hesitated, and that hesitation cost him. Ethan reached him seconds later. The former SEAL grabbed the back of his jacket, turned him, and pinned him firmly against the porch support. The struggle lasted only moments. Travis fought, cursed, threatened. But Ethan's grip never moved. Then a distant sound drifted across the valley. Sirens, multiple sirens, growing louder, closer. Travis froze. For the first time that night, genuine fear appeared on his face, and Ethan knew the end had finally begun. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights appeared beyond the ranch gate, flashing across the darkness like distant lightning. For years, Travis Whitmore had been the one making people afraid. Now, for the first time, fear belonged to him. Ethan kept him pinned firmly against the porch post, not hurting him, not punishing him, simply making sure he couldn't run. Ranger stood nearby, watching every movement. The German Shepherd's amber eyes never left Travis. Within moments, 2 sheriff's vehicles rolled into the yard. Sheriff Thomas Granger stepped out first. Deputy Owen Mercer followed. A second patrol unit arrived close behind them. The officers moved quickly but calmly. They had already been briefed. They knew exactly who they were dealing with. "Step back, Ethan." Sheriff Granger's voice was steady. Ethan released Travis and moved away. Immediately, 2 deputies secured the struggling man. Travis tried to pull free, tried to shout, tried to blame everyone except himself. "You don't understand. They lied. They set me up." Nobody responded, because the evidence had already spoken. A third vehicle entered the property. Victoria Hale stepped out carrying a laptop bag and several folders. Even at midnight, she looked composed, focused, prepared. She walked directly toward the sheriff. "I have everything." Her tone left little room for argument. Within minutes, she began presenting the evidence: the forged signatures, the fraudulent power of attorney documents, the recorded threats, the photographs from the locked bedroom, the medication container, the intimidation message painted on the barn. Then came the final blow, the trail camera footage. Victoria connected a tablet and opened the recordings. Everyone watched. The video clearly showed Travis entering the property, clearly showed Derek and Brent carrying fuel cans, clearly showed the attempted arson, clearly showed Travis directing the operation. The silence afterward felt heavy, permanent. Brent lowered his head. Derek looked defeated. Both men understood their situation. Travis still refused. "They owe me." The words exploded from him. "They owe me everything." Harold heard the outburst. Slowly, he stepped forward. The old man looked exhausted, older than ever, yet strangely lighter, as though years of carrying invisible weight were finally ending. He looked directly at his grandson. "No, Travis." The younger man glared at him. Harold's voice remained calm. "We gave you everything we had." A tear slid down the old man's face. "You just wanted more." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Travis looked away, unable to hold his grandfather's gaze. That single action hurt Harold more than any insult, because it confirmed what he had feared for years. The boy he raised was gone. The person standing there was a stranger. The deputies placed handcuffs on Travis. The metallic click echoed through the yard. Mabel began crying quietly. Not from sadness, from relief. The kind of relief that only comes after surviving something for far too long. Sheriff Granger escorted Travis toward a patrol vehicle. As they passed, Travis stopped. He turned one last time toward Harold, toward Mabel, toward Ethan. Hatred burned in his eyes, but beneath it now lived something new: defeat. The patrol car door closed, and just like that, the nightmare began to end. As the vehicles prepared to leave, Victoria approached Harold and Mabel. "We still have court ahead." Harold nodded. "I understand." Victoria offered a small smile. "But tonight, you can finally sleep." Mabel covered her mouth as fresh tears appeared. For years, she had gone to bed afraid. Afraid of footsteps, afraid of shouting, afraid of locked doors, afraid of tomorrow. Now, that fear was gone. When the last patrol vehicle disappeared down the road, silence returned to Iron Creek Ranch. A peaceful silence, a healing silence. Harold stood beside Ethan, watching the distant tail lights fade into the darkness. After a long moment, the old man spoke. "I don't know how to thank you." Ethan looked toward Ranger. The dog sat proudly beside the porch, watching over everyone, exactly as he always had. "You don't have to." Harold's eyes filled with emotion. Ethan continued quietly. "Families are supposed to protect each other." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Harold placed a trembling hand on Ethan's shoulder. The gesture said everything words could not. Across the yard, the first light of dawn began touching the horizon. The longest night of their lives was finally over. And for the first time in many years, hope had a place to stay. Spring arrived slowly in Montana. The snow disappeared first from the hills, then from the fence lines, and finally from the open fields surrounding Iron Creek Ranch. The land seemed to wake up one careful breath at a time. For Harold and Mabel Whitmore, healing happened the same way, slowly, carefully, one day at a time. 3 months after Travis's arrest, the court proceedings finally ended. Judge Eleanor Whitaker reviewed every piece of evidence: the forged signatures, the fraudulent financial transfers, the recordings, the photographs, the attempted arson, the intimidation, the years of abuse. By the end of the hearing, the decision was clear. Full ownership of the Wickmore property was restored to Harold and Mabel. Every fraudulent document was voided. Every stolen account was recovered. And Travis Whitmore was convicted on multiple charges, including elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, criminal intimidation, and attempted arson. When the ruling was announced, Harold lowered his head into his hands. Then he cried. Not because he had won, because for the first time in years, he no longer had to fight. Mabel cried beside him. Victoria Hale quietly handed her a tissue. Neither woman spoke. Neither needed to. Some victories are too emotional for words. Meanwhile, Summit Crest Holdings immediately withdrew its purchase proposal. The development project collapsed. The Whitmore land remained exactly where it belonged, with the family that had built it. Yet when everything was finally over, Harold and Mabel surprised everyone. They chose not to return home immediately. Not because they couldn't, because they weren't ready. A house can be repaired in weeks. A heart often takes longer. So they stayed at Iron Creek Ranch. And little by little, life began again. Harold started repairing fences with Ethan. The old man moved slower than he once had, but every board he replaced seemed to restore a piece of himself. Sometimes he taught Ethan old ranching techniques passed down through generations. Sometimes they simply worked in silence. Neither minded. Mabel transformed the area around the farmhouse porch. She planted flowers, lavender, marigolds, wild roses. By midsummer, color surrounded the house. Life surrounded the house. Hope surrounded the house. And Ranger became the unofficial supervisor of every project. The retired military dog followed Mabel through the garden, followed Harold through the pasture, followed Ethan almost everywhere. The entire county seemed to fall in love with him, especially after word of the story spread. Neighbors began visiting. At first, only a few, then more. An elderly widow arrived seeking legal advice about her finances. Victoria helped her. A retired teacher came needing help with paperwork. Someone assisted him. A veteran struggling with loneliness stopped by one afternoon. He stayed for dinner. Without planning it, Iron Creek Ranch slowly became something special. A safe place. A listening place. A healing place. One evening, near the end of summer, Harold stood beside Ethan at the newly repaired front gate. The sunset painted the fields gold. Ranger rested nearby. Mabel watered flowers on the porch. For several minutes they simply watched the evening sky. Then Harold spoke. When Mabel and I walked up that road during the storm, his voice softened. I thought our lives were over. Ethan remained silent. Harold smiled. They weren't over. The old man looked toward the farmhouse, toward Mabel, toward Ranger, toward the life they had rebuilt. We were just lost. Something about those words touched Ethan deeply, because maybe they applied to him, too. For years, he had believed he was simply surviving, a lonely veteran carrying ghosts, a man trapped between the past and the future. But somewhere along the way, helping Harold and Mabel had changed him. The ranch no longer felt empty. His life no longer felt unfinished. He had found purpose again, and perhaps that was its own kind of rescue. Later that evening, everyone gathered around the kitchen table. Fresh bread filled the air. Laughter echoed through the house. Real laughter. Warm laughter. The kind that only appears after pain has finally loosened its grip. As darkness settled outside, Mabel stepped onto the porch. The same porch where she had once stood, frightened and broken. She looked down the long dirt road. The road that had brought her through rain, fear, and despair. Now it looked peaceful beneath the stars. Ethan joined her. For a while, they stood quietly. Then Mabel smiled. I used to think being rescued meant someone carrying you away. Ethan looked at her. Tears glistened in her eyes. This time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude. Now I think rescue means something different. What? She looked back toward the farmhouse, toward Harold. Toward Ranger. Toward the people who had helped her remember who she was. Then she smiled. It means someone opening a door and reminding you that you're strong enough to walk through it yourself. Inside, Harold laughed at something Ranger had done. The dog barked proudly. The farmhouse glowed warmly against the Montana night. And on land that once held only a lonely veteran and his loyal dog, there now stood something much greater. A refuge. A family. A second chance. Because sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. Sometimes they arrive through a quiet ranch, a good man willing to stand up for strangers, and a faithful dog who knows how to recognize pain before anyone says a word. And sometimes, when hope seems completely lost, all it takes is one open door to help someone find their way home again.